friends, welcome to the Society. This is a talk in a series that we give on art, history and culture, because we find that many British Buddhists don't know much about the culture of Buddhism. They know quite a lot about meditation and so on. They know very little about the history of Buddhism. And so we're very lucky tonight actually having with us a very distinguished speaker who is currently a teacher at SOAS, Dr. Amal Gunasena. And those of you who've looked at this little piece of paper will see he has the most enormous CV at the back, which I'm not going to read out. It's a little embarrassing. But tonight's talk is really on the most interesting man, and that's Anagarika Dharmapala. He's one of the great figures of the transmission of Buddhism to the West. Born in the late 19th century in Sri Lanka, and when I was last there, I took a photograph of him. There's statues all over Ceylon. And there's one very nice one of him in Kandy. But he was a great and important figure, and we're linked strangely with Dharmapala, and because our own history. The development of Buddhism from the Buddhist Society's point of view came through this Theosophical Society, and in particular the Buddhist wing of the Buddhist Lodge of the Theosophical Society. I won't go into that. I'm sure that will be touched on in tonight's talk. But I'd like to thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bidalfa, and I very appreciate your audience and welcome you, and also thank you again for giving me this opportunity to talk to this audience. I'm sure they are distinguished and Buddhist scholars. I consider this as a great opportunity for me to meet you all and to say something about this great person born in Sri Lanka. I must also mention Louis, who took so much interest in inviting me, and I accepted it, but it took so long for me to come here, but I'm very pleased that I am here today to give this talk. I have prepared this talk thinking that to do it informally, a little bit difficult as I have to quote from his lectures and articles he has written. So I'm going to read my talk. As we go on, you can raise any questions or any uncertainties with me. But I'm also pleased to tell you that I'm a person born in Matara, where Anagarika Dharmapala's parents originated. They left Matara, southern small town, and settled down in Colombo. That's where Anagarika Dharmapala was born, to this very rich family. So we'll see what he did after they moved to Colombo. So the topic, can I start now? Yeah. The topic is the gift of Dhamma excels all other gifts. The quotation is sabba danam, Dhamma danam, jinati, appreciating Anagarika Dharmapala as a leading spirit in the propagation of Buddhism in the West. Anagarika Dharmapala was one of the most dynamic and cultured national heroes of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, with a deep sense of patriotism and highly disciplined mind, who was prepared to sacrifice his own comforts, aspirations, and almost his entire life for the sake of moral development and peaceful enjoyment of life of all nations. He was a fearless defender of the teachings of the Buddha, which he strongly believed would be the remedy or panacea for the troubled world in which he grew up. The deeper and deeper we penetrate into realizing the personal sacrifices he made, and the vast number of articles written, the lectures delivered, and the hundreds of journeys made from the east to the west, the more we become to appreciate his hitherto unsurpassed service to spread the teachings of the Buddha throughout the civilized world, what Sir Edwin Arnold described as the light of Asia. I have quoted a section of a Pali stanza, that sabba danam, dhamma danam, jinati, or gatha from Dhammapada, in the subject of my talk, for the reason that Anagarika Dharmapala very often used to mention this in his lectures and writings to emphasize that honest endeavor, or rather sacrifice in dissemination of the Tathagata or Buddha's teaching, is far superior or excellent to any other givings or dana. This is what Anagarika believed as to be the highest dana, or the selfless service he could offer to the world. Sabba danam, Dhamma danam, jinati. The English translation is, the gift of Dhamma excels all other gifts. Dhammapada, Tannavagga, verse 354. As we all know, Buddhism was propagated first by the Buddha himself and his Arahant disciples. During the first 200 years of its history, Buddhism was mainly confined to the northern part of India. Then came the great king Ashoka, 236 years after the passing away of the Buddha, who was solely responsible for the propagation of Buddha's teachings throughout India and to the other parts of Asia, including Persia and Sri Lanka. As soon as the sasana, or the community of bhikkhus, was well founded, Buddha's instructions for them were, I'm quoting, Charata bhikkhave bahujana hitaya bahujana sukhaya. Go now and wander for the welfare and happiness of all the people and proclaim the life of purity. The bhikkhus so dispersed were referred to as Dhamma Dutas, messengers of the Dhamma, or the messengers of Dhamma. The methods used by the Dhamma Dutas, or the messengers of the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, only universal love and compassion, but not any iniquitous methods. Conversion by compulsion was unknown and repugnant to Buddha and his disciples. The Arahant Mahinda, the son of the great king Ashoka, was the first Dhamma Duta to arrive in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, with the Buddha's message in 243 BC, before Christ, and Anagarika Dharmapala stands as the first Dhamma Duta to go out from Sri Lanka, to wander for the peace and welfare of people of the East and also of the West, with the message or the sublime teachings of the Buddha. Before I proceed to the main body of my talk, to appreciate Anagarika Dharmapala as the leading spirit in propagating the teachings of the Buddha in the West, it is not only relevant but also essential to mention briefly here the religious and political background in which Anagarika Dharmapala grew up and developed his future aspirations. I will have to mention some history about the British occupation in Sri Lanka. The British forces took full control of Ceylon in 1815 after years of encroachment on the coasts of the island, following the Dutch power in the region. After the Kingdom of Kandy was captured and became under the rule of the British colonial power, the political and the long-preserved religious and social institutions began to suffer under the alien rulers' control. The most affected change of the longest established tradition, since the King Devanam was the end of indigenous monarchy and the withdrawal of royal patronage to the Mahasangha and the Buddhist institution. The full strength of the state machinery was actively used against Buddhism on the side of Christianity. New rulers did not wait long before they implemented new laws such as Wasteland Ordinance to strip the Kandyan peasantry of their lands, and soon the properties donated to the temples and the Maligawa, that is the temple of the sacred tooth relic, came under their control, and to administer them, officers of the British Raj were appointed. The British took every attempt to give a Protestant education to the young men and women, and a large number of clergymen, that is missionaries, were brought to Ceylon and also from the United States to engage in missionary activities. Their salaries were paid by the Crown. The jobs in the state sector were guaranteed for those who were Christians, and the lowest wages were paid to those who were non-Christians and not fluent in English. The masses of this land were subjected to feel inferior and aliens in their own soil. Although promised to honor and safeguard the nation's religion and their institutions, the official recognition and patronage to them, such as the Temple of the Sacred Tooth Relic, soon started to slip away from the attention. The hitherto recorded governmental support to the annual ceremonies connected with the Sacred Tooth Relic soon attracted the resentment of the European Christian community in Ceylon. The governors later refused to attend the ceremony or to salute it as their first honors. The British Governor Barnes, 1828, once declared that he would do nothing which could imply identity in the British faith on the part of the authorities. There were many forces in action who were eager to see the triumph of Christianity in Ceylon and disestablishment of Buddhism. The colonial secretary tenant asserted with confidence that the severance of state's connection with Buddhism would in reality mean the withdrawal of the only stay that could much longer have retarded its decay. British Buddhist monks insisted that the government conform to the undertakings to them in the Kandyan Convention. Many Christians believe that Buddhism in Ceylon will fall apart. This is well expressed by Forbes in 1840. I anticipate that Buddhism, shorn of its splendor, unaided by authority, and torn by internal dissensions, will not long have power to retain even its present slight control over the actions of its votaries or devotees, and that it will fall into disuse before Christianity is prepared to step into its place. Predictions of this sort were made with even greater confidence by our own native Sinhala Christians like James de Alwitt, the famous Orientalist. Discussing the prospect of Buddhism in the course of a lecture on 25th October 1861, de Alwitt declared, "There are indeed good grounds for believing that Buddhism will at no very distant period disappear from this island." Alwitt gave due credit to the colonial government for having helped to bring about this state of affairs. The British government failed to recognize or give any credit to the traditional monastic school, that is Pirivenas, although in the larger part of the island there were no schools other than monastic schools. The Governor Colebrook, 1831, refused to appreciate their importance and dismissed them curtly in one sentence. The education afforded by the native priesthood in their temples and colleges scarcely merits any notice. For several decades to come, this remained the official attitude towards monastic school. The first governor, Frederick North, encouraged the missionaries to pursue their work in Ceylon. In 1805, a number of missionaries from the London Missionary Society arrived, followed by Baptists, 1812, Wesleyans, 1814, and the Church of England in 1818. There were American missionaries sponsored by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. By 1830, missionary activities doubled. The printed version of the Bible was distributed all over the island. 1,500,000 copies were distributed over the period of between 1820 and 1840. The Christian missionaries went ahead in slandering and insulting the religion of the people, and members of the Sangha were subjected to ridicule, and their scholarship and authority were challenged. The missionaries had all the facilities and resources to printing, which they abundantly used to propagate the religion of the West and to ridicule the Buddhist moral conduct as primitive and purposeless. At the height of this insult and propaganda against Buddhism arose an aggressive and dynamic bhikkhu, a fiery orator, pamphleteer and fighter called Mohotiwati Gunananda, to lead the challenge to Christian missionaries. Mohotiwati Gunananda was an erudite bhikkhu who was well versed in the Tripitaka and also who had a first-class knowledge in Christianity. He was the first to start mass agitation on Buddhist grievances among the rural masses. The encounter between the Christian missionaries and Mohotiwati Gunananda, which had been going on for several years through rival publications, took a dramatic turn in August 1873, when both parties agreed to face each other in a 2-day public debate at Panadur, that is a town very close to Colombo, on the relative merits of Buddhism and Christianity. This platform in front of several thousands of people gave the champion monk to display his mastery on Pali sources and Orthodox Buddhism. The Christians failed to answer the questions or challenge the validity of the replies given by Mohotiwati on Tripitaka, and instead glided on Pali literary accounts on heavens and Jataka story. The debate was an unprecedented victory for the Buddhists, the fame of which spread to Europe and USA through English translations. The time was ripe, and the path was cleared for a greatest patriot and fearless defender of the Buddha's teachings, Dhamma, to emerge. And that was when the young Don David Heavitarana, later known as Anagarika Dharmapala, stepped onto the path only to go forward in his wholly dedicated wish to spread the teachings of the Buddha throughout the world. Before I proceed to our main theme of the talk, it is essential to digress a little to mention a short biographical note of Anagarika Dharmapala to understand and to appreciate his unmatched and selfless commitment to his mission to propagate what he thought was the only solution to the suffering of mankind. Among the few well-to-do families which stood against the ever-increasing influence of the Christian expansion and the decay of the traditional Sinhala Buddhist culture was the Hewavitarana family of Mathara in the southern province of Sri Lanka. Hewavitarana Dingiri Appuhami, the first member of this family, belonged to the prosperous and well-respected cultivator or farmer class. He had two sons, and one of them became a bhikkhu, Hittati Attadasi Thero, and the other son, Don Karolis Hewavitarana, migrated to Colombo and established their furniture manufacturing business in the Peta area. It is still a thriving business. If you happen to be in Colombo, you can see. He married the daughter Mallika of a Colombo businessman and this Perera Dharmagurudana, who were the richest merchants of Ceylon. And this Dharmagurudana donated a piece of land at Maliga Akanda in Colombo to erect a Pirivena Buddhist monastic school of the highest order, and appointed the reputed scholar monk Hikkadue Sumangala Mahathera as its principal, whose guidance and influence were the lifeline of Anagarika Dharmapala's 47 years of dedication to the Buddha Sasana. Both Don Karolis and Mallika Hewavitarana were wishing for a son, but by no means their reason for such a desire were the same. Naturally, Mudliya Don Karolis wanted a successor to his very successful and expanding furniture business, while his wife dreamed of a bhikkhu who would sacrifice all his comforts to propagate Buddhism. They had a son who was born in Colombo. He was named Don David Hewavitarana, later took the name Dharmapala. Don David's younger brothers were Dr. Charles Alois Hewavitarana and Edmund Hewavitarana. Although a few years before his death, Anagarika Dharmapala took yellow robes to be a bhikkhu, his mother's meritorious wish was not fulfilled at his early age. While reading through many hundreds of pages of Anagarika Dharmapala's notes and personal diaries, I found the reason for the cause of this. In his diary notes dated 26 November 1924, he says, "I could not obtain pabbajja or monkhood as a result of a disease which I suffered in my childhood and which affected the movements of my right leg. I am not fortunate enough to be a monk." This is Dharmapala's own words. Young David Hewavitarana grew up in a meticulously organized atmosphere of traditional piety and Buddhist custom. His instinctive desire and observances were well concerned with Buddhist teachings. Every morning and every evening, he would kneel in the shrine with his father and mother to take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, the triple gem, and promised to observe the 5 precepts. Most of the schools surrounding his urban neighborhood were Christians, where the majority of pupils were burghers. He was first sent to a girls' school at the age of 5. His state education was an English one. Dharmapala attended Peta Catholic School, a private school, a Sinhala private school, CMS Boys School at Kotte, St. Benedict School, St. Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia and the Colombo Academy. He had the opportunity to learn the Christian religion and the practice, and at the same time was advancing his knowledge in the Dhamma through self-reading and constant exposure to the teaching and guidance of the family's spiritual leader and close friend Venerable Hikkadue Sumangala Thero, and his regular visits to the Kotahena temple in the company of his mother. In his 9th year, he was initiated into the Brahmacharya vow, celibacy, by his father at the temple and advised to be contented with whatever he got to eat and to sleep but little. In Pali, he has said, Appa Kichocha Salla Hukavutti, simple life. At Anglican Christian boarding school at Kotte, which was in the aggressively missionary atmosphere, Don David was daily forced to attend Christian services in the church. He did not like the practice or the teaching offered and developed a deep desire in him to advance further in his quest for Buddhism. When once Don David asked the principal of his college, St. Thomas, about the school's policy of teaching English, the principal's reply was, "We don't come to Ceylon to teach you English, but we come to Ceylon to convert you." Such remarks of his teachers and the attitudes of those whom he thought were worthy of emulation, rapidly changed his understanding of the righteous way forward for his country. This change is mirrored in his following statement. In contrast to my wine drinking, meat eating and pleasure loving missionary teachers, the bhikkhus, mainly Hikkadu Sumangala and Mohotivatte Gunananda, whom he knew very well, were meek and abstemious. I loved their company and would sit quietly in a corner and listen to their wise discourse, even when it was far on my head. The biggest change of Don David's career aspirations took effect in 1880 when he joined the Theosophical Society under Colonel Olcott at the young age of 16. The Theosophists arrived in Ceylon in 1880 and were attracting so much attention of the Buddhist sector. In 1884, much against the wishes of his father and Venerable Hikkadu Sumangala, Don David went to Adyar in India with Madame Blavatsky to launch their campaign. Later, returning from India, he decided to leave home and reside at the Theosophical headquarters in Colombo. He decided to join with Colonel Olcott and C.W. Leadbeater in their campaign to collect funds for the activities of the campaign and acted as a junior clerk. From this juncture, he renounced wealth, comfort of a secular life and became Anagarika Dharmapala, meaning homeless, but he had many homes, but homeless word doesn't give that meaning. He left everything. Celibate, full-time worker for Buddhism. His frequent trips abroad to India, Siam, Japan, UK and USA started soon after he became involved in the activities of the Theosophical Society. His trip to Buddhagaya in 1891, the place the Buddha attained enlightenment, gave him a shock to find that a sacred place was in the hands of a Saivite or Shiva priest. The Buddha image transformed into a Hindu god, and the Buddhist pilgrims barred from offering puja and paying respects. The most of the rest of his devoted career was spent on reclaiming this most sacred Buddhist site from Hindu occupation. Anagarika Dharmapala travelled extensively in Europe, America and the Far East and addressed thousands of meetings, had written thousands of letters and published hundreds of articles in various parts of the world with his avowed aim of dissemination of Buddha Dhamma, that is Buddha's teaching, and to wish for a righteous and peaceful society. One of the major developments of his campaign was meeting with Mrs. Mary M. Foster in 1893, a rich Hawaiian lady who became his main benefactress throughout his later life, without whose extremely generous donations most of his ambitious work, such as London Buddhist Vihara, the printing press, vernacular weekly paper Sinhala Bauddhaya, Buddhist activities in India, including Mahabodhi Society, would not have been possible. In 1906, his father passed away. In 1915, riots between the Muslims and the Sinhalese erupted in Ceylon, and an internment was imposed on Anagarika by the British government so that he could not leave India. After he returned from India, that is after five years, he continued his Dhammaduta campaign in Europe and the USA through those suffering from severe illness. Despite continuing health problems, Dharmapala decided to leave Ceylon, and in March 1931, he sailed to Calcutta. To fill his long-awaited sacred ambition, he became a monk on 13 June 1931 by the name of Sri Devamitta Dharmapala. When Sri Devamitta Dharmapala received Upasampada in 1933, that is after 2 years of his ordination, at Saranath, Venerable Sri Devamitta Dharmapala received Upasampada in 1933 at Saranath. For this ceremony, 3 senior monks, Madugalle Siddhartha, Kave Sumangala and Dunupokune Dharmakirti were invited. Venerable Devamitta Dharmapala passed away in December of the same year at the age of 68. Now, turning to the central theme of my talk, to appreciate Venerable Anagarika Dharmapala as the pioneer in the revival of Theravada Buddhism in Ceylon and India, and the first Buddhist to preach Dhamma in 3 continents. One has not only to read all the brilliant articles he wrote and analyze hundreds of public speeches he made and the dozens of lectures he delivered in various parts of the world, but also to examine the advancements made and the transformations occurred in the places of Buddhist worship and the centers of Buddhist learning in Europe in particular and in the USA. Before the advent of Anagarika's Dhammaduta work, that is propagation, in Europe, the general conception among the majority of people about this Asiatic religion of Buddhism was that it is a primitive religion and of idol worship. The earliest knowledge of Buddhism came to England, Germany and other countries of Europe through books on Buddhism, not through Buddhist missions. The first study of Buddhism and gradual spread in the West began in the early 19th century by the scholars such as the French Orientalist Eugene Burnouf and George Cerner of England, who was a civil servant in Sri Lanka, who published the Mahavansa in Roman characters in 1837, that is the Great Chronicle of Sri Lanka. In England, it was primarily due to T.W. Rhys Davids, his 1843 to 1922, scholastic interest and endeavor that Buddhist studies found a place in this country and attracted other scholars such as Fosbury, Oldenburg and Robert Childers. Professor Rhys Davids' greatest contribution was the founding of the Polytech Society in 1881. In America, it was Colonel Henry Olcott who first took a great interest in the teaching of the Buddha after reading the proceedings of the great debate, Panadura debate or the Vade in 1873. However, introduction of Buddhism to the USA occurred at the World's Parliament of Religions held in the city of Chicago in 1893, in which Anagarika Dharmapala represented Southern Buddhism, what is better known as Theravada Buddhism. Although scholastic interpretations and appreciations of Buddha's teachings were spreading far and wide and several books were written, it was Anagarika Dharmapala who was the first practitioner of the Buddha's path and the teachings, who took his mission to the West as devout believer and practitioner of the Dhamma. It is interesting to note the following notes in Anagarika's diary dated 4th August 1925. I'm quoting from his diary. Ceylon and England can never again be disunited. I shall therefore work for the welfare of the British people. England should not treat India like a wife-beating husband. I don't know why he said that. Referring to his internment in Calcutta by the British government in 1915, Anagarika says, "For no cause I was punished, and yet I made up my mind to send thoughts of love to the British bureaucrats who were responsible for my internment. Instead of hatred, compassion sprang up in my heart to the British people." He further writes, "I thought of the great work of preaching the Dhamma to the English people. The British are an arrogant race." I'm sure it's very selfish, and therefore I decided that I shall practice love, righteousness, generosity and truthfulness and adopt the ethic of forgiving patience and act like the Bhikkhu Punna who went to Sunaparanta country where a harsh, cruel people dwelt. He further says, "I had no money to begin a great work like the one I contemplated, and yet I did not despair. This was about establishing a Buddhist vihara in London to teach Dhamma and to practice meditation, etc. Money came from my brother and Mrs. Mary Foster of Hawaii. She was his main source of donation. I did not ask Buddhists to help me, and with the money I received from my brother and the savings of my allowance since 1916, I purchased the house and garden at number 86, Madley Road, Ealing in London. In fact, throughout his diaries I read, I couldn't find any trace of any money coming from any other individual than his own family and Mary Foster. In Sri Lanka, whoever lived here didn't seem to donate a penny for his work. This is how Anagarika's long-cherished ambition of establishment a place in London to propagate the Buddha Dhamma at last founded. According to the many notes I read in his diaries, there was no mention of any contributions coming from either any British or Sri Lanka individual or institutions to help his religious work in London, except his immediate family and Mrs. Mary Foster. Anagarika's ardent wish for doing all this Dhammaduta work in Britain was, quoting, "The sublime Dhamma of the Lord Buddha must be preached to the Britons, who vociferously shout that Britons shall never be slaves. Buddhism reaches the highest universal freedom. It is the science of freedom," he further says. Anagarika Dharmapala was not initiating or propagating to erect Buddhist viharas or dwellings or dagabas or centers in Sri Lanka or anywhere else, and to collect funds for this purpose as his avowed aim was to teach and propagate the sublime Dhamma of the Buddha. However, he felt that without a center in London or anywhere in Britain, his mission would not be possible as a practitioner. In 1924, his dream of founding a place for Buddhist worship and practice came a reality. The premises at Ealing was named Foster House in honor of Mrs. Mary Foster, who was his faithful and main benefactress. Anagarika Dharmapala sold the premises at Ealing and moved the British Buddhist activities to Gloucester Road in 1926, where the first London Buddhist Vihara was opened. Three most respected and erudite monks from Sri Lanka, those are Venerable Paravahara Vajrayana, Venerable Hagoda Nandasara and Dehigaspe Panyasa, arrived in London in 1927. The highest activities of meditation and practice of dana and sila were commenced with proper instructions and example. The functioning of the new vihara continued until the Second World War, and the monks had to return to Sri Lanka. The vihara premises were reopened in 1955 in Ovington Square, Knightsbridge, and Dr. Hammalawa Saddasitsa, erudite monk, Pandit monk, became the head of the vihara in 1958. The vihara then moved to number 4 Heathfield Gardens in Chiswick in 1964. The London Buddhist Vihara became the first center of Theravada Buddhist Center, which was a free and open place for Buddhist worship, meditation and learning with resident Buddhist Sangha of the highest caliber. As you all know, it is now in the avenue in Chiswick, has again moved. Introduction of Buddhism to the USA occurred at the World's Parliament of Religious held in the city of Chicago in 1893, in which Anagarika Dharmapala represented Southern Buddhism, or the Theravada school of Buddhism. The subject Anagarika selected for this honorary occasion was the world's debt to Buddha, which was unquestionably suited for the audience from different quarters of the world. Anagarika Dharmapala highlighted many of the Buddha's spiritual advices and practices involving humanity, evolution taught by Buddha, freedom of religion and speech, the higher morality, universal compassion, universalism of Buddha's teaching, tolerance, Buddhism and modern science, and women in Buddhism, etc. A lot of things were included in his speech. He concluded his lecture by saying, Buddhism advocates universal peace amongst nations and deplores war and bloodshed. The rights of smaller tribes and nations for a separate existence should be protected from aggressive warfare. In the Anagarika Anguttara Nikaya, Tikanipata, Brahmana Vagga, Buddha advocates arbitration instead of war. Buddhism strongly condemns war on the grounds of great losses it brings on humanity. It says that devastation, famine and other such evils have been brought on by war. C.T.A. Strauss of New York was probably the first American to accept Buddhism. This is after the lecture, Anagarika's lecture. Accept Buddhism after observing the 5 precepts of Buddhism and receiving the 3 refuges, Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, from Anagarika Dharmapala. Anagarika Dharmapala's lecture was so great and the impression created by it that he received congratulations from every quarter. The following is a pen picture of his personality recorded in St. Louis Observer on September 21st, 1893. I'm quoting from this. With his black curly locks thrown from his broad brow, his keen, clear eyes fixed upon the audience, his long brown fingers emphasizing the utterances of his vibrant voice, he looked the very image of a propagandist. And one trembled to know that such a figure stood at the head of the movement to consolidate all the disciples of Buddha and to spread the light of Asia throughout the civilized world. After Anagarika's lecture at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, many journals and newspapers published highly impressive reports of his eloquence in speech and his true knowledge of what he learned as Buddhism and practice. He was invited to give talks and deliver lectures in other parts of the USA as well as including New York. F. Yeats Brown in The Spectator of 30th January 1926, this is a British writer, writes, Last month I heard a tall priest, dressed in the saffron robes of an Oriental ascetic, attempt to convert an American audience to Buddhism. A few days ago I saw him again in London, and learned of his object in coming here. His project is to establish a Buddhist missionary center in England. Before taking my seat in the town hall, New York, I had looked around the hall and observed that the gathering was composed of chiefly of that curious types of citizen with lofty brow but vacant eye. For an hour, no a moo or a cough from the audience. Here was a man with a message. He delivered it erect, composed, master of himself and his hearers with the art of an orator and the dignity of a priest to whom the world is nothing. How will his audience take him in England? This journalist was asking. Can the austere and bloodless precepts of Buddhism gain a foothold in this land of beef and beer? This is about England. Anagarika Dharmapala will create few eddies in the spiritual life of this country, for his teaching is too alien to our mental habits. But he should be heard by those interested in Eastern faith, for as a teacher of them, he is as authentic as he is eloquent. We can see how Anagarika Dharmapala's Dhamma mission was received in the West, and particularly in England, and also how it has created a permanent impact on the moral and spiritual behavior of the people in this country over the last 7 decades since his passing away. It was Anagarika Dharmapala's aim to raise what he thought was best in the national character to a higher level, governed by the superior moral philosophy that any nation dreamt was possible during his time. To his mind, the Buddhist path was unquestionably the universal remedy, which he had been practiced and venerated since his childhood. He began to introduce and promote the Buddhist methods of bhavana, that is, in English later, meditation, to many who were searching for spiritual guidance in this troubled and confused society. It was Anagarika Dharmapala, the first layman, who emphasized the spiritual attainment and relief one can derive from practicing Buddhist bhavana or meditation. He gave guidance and advice wherever he went to preach the bhikkhus and laymen and women to practice Buddhist meditation at least 10 to 15 minutes every day. And he never forgot to tell his audience, whether it was in Sri Lanka, India, Japan, Britain or USA, that he begins his day after meditating for several minutes. In my view, Anagarika Dharmapala's best gift to the West, and particularly to all of us, was his advice to have universal kindness and to develop his spiritual quality to take Buddhist meditation seriously, to brighten ours and others' lives by spreading metta, loving kindness, to all living beings. This globally extended desire is aptly revealed when he wanted to meet Professor Rhys Davids, the renowned Pali scholar, in London, whom he met on many occasions in Sri Lanka, on his way to attend the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1983. The purpose of his visit was to hand him the highly valuable manuscript called Vidarshana Pota, that is, Book on Meditation, which he found at a Buddhist vihara, that is in Biographical in Sri Lanka. He wanted Professor Davids to translate a very precious book, Ola leaf manuscript. He wanted Professor Davids to translate into English and made it available to any person seeking spiritual knowledge and guidance from the Buddhist canon. The book was later translated into English in the name of Yogavachara's Manual. This Yogavachara word has been used to mean a person who meditates. It is available. I think that this is the first ever authentic manual on Buddhist meditation written in any Buddhist country in the world. Up to that time, the Buddhist meditation practice was referred to as a form of tantric and mystic ritual experience. We must highly appreciate the efforts of Anagarika Dharmapala in clearing misconceptions of bhavana or meditation held in general belief in the West, and his advice to accept bhavana or meditation as the best moral exercise to clean one's mind and to spread metta or universal kindness universally. The other major contribution to the scholarly world, particularly in the West, offered by Anagarika Dharmapala was the introduction of Buddhist psychology. Until his famous lectures on Buddhist psychology were delivered and his letters were published, such as on the psychology of progress, or the 37 principles of Bodhi, and the psychology of Buddhism, etc. To many nations, Buddhism was a mystic practice, and the Buddha was a kind of a Hindu mythological figure or avatar. When Anagarika wrote and published his first article on the psychology of Buddhism in February 1914, published in the Mahabodhi Journal, the Western world as well as the Indian scholarship were shaken. In the contents of many lectures Dharmapala delivered and the discussions conducted, his authentic knowledge of Buddhist psychology and skills of interpreting it were overwhelming. It is beyond doubt that to Anagarika Dharmapala belongs much of the credit for making the existence of Buddhist psychology more widely known in the Western world. Anagarika Dharmapala is best remembered and appreciated for his indefatigable courage and unfathomable service rendered to reclaim one of the most revered or venerated sites of Buddhist worship, that is Buddhagaya, where Bodhisattva Siddhartha attained enlightenment. When he visited the site for the first time in 1891, he was shocked and deeply saddened to see that the entire sacred place was dilapidated and functioning as a Hindu temple, and the Buddha statues had been broken and scattered everywhere in the ground. Hindu priest Mahant has transformed the vihara into a temple, and even the large Buddha statue had been dressed to represent the god Vishnu, making devotees to believe that the Shakyamuni Buddha is an avatar or reincarnation of their Lord Vishnu. The Buddhists were barred from attending or worship. Anagarika Dharmapala had no time to wait, and he immediately started a campaign to reclaim the Buddhist site and to restore it to its former glory. The Mahabodhi Society at Colombo was founded in 1891, but its officers were soon moved to Calcutta the following year. The primary aim of this campaign was the restoration of the sacred site and to take into Buddhist control. To accomplish this, Dharmapala sought help from other Buddhist countries like Burma and Japan, and initiated a lawsuit against the Hindu priest Mahant, who had held control of the site for centuries. The question of worship was a difficult issue to settle, and after prolonged struggle, this was successful only after Indian independence in 1947 and 16 years after Dharmapala's death, 1933, with the partial restoration of the site to the management of the Mahabodhi Society in 1949. The temple management of Buddhagaya was entrusted to a committee comprised of equal numbers of Hindus and Buddhists. This was a victory for the millions of Buddhists all over the world. For almost all Anagarika Dharmapala's Dhamma work and expenses for his numerous trips abroad and the expenditure for the restoration of Buddhagaya, I could not find any evidence to prove that he received any or much financial help from the Buddhists in Ceylon or any other individuals or organizations in India, Britain, Japan or USA. Apart from his own assets and of his parents, the large sum of money for his movement came from the rich Hawaiian benefactress Mrs. Foster. It is estimated that she had donated more than 3 million rupees during the period from 1890 to 1927. There were occasions when Anagarika Dharmapala had to turn to Mrs. Foster, even for some smaller donations. He, as a true Buddhist, never forgot to acknowledge her inestimable help and always remember to celebrate her birthday and transfer merit for her well-being. Anagarika Dharmapala's vision of a just and moral society is one without hatred, and everyone aspiring to be an example of a righteous individual. He advocated following the 5 precepts and strongly protested against killing of animals and animal sacrifice. He also believed that consumption of suramaria, or alcohol or any form of drug, is a major cause for many crimes and can lead to a just society to be unjust and counter-progressive. His rejection of these practices was not political, as one would have expected, but religious. In concluding my talk, I have to say that there was no single action Anagarika Dharmapala took, a speech he delivered, and a letter written for the sake of his own gain, fame or victory. He was an extraordinary man whose life was entirely devoted to a noble cause which he believed was right. May I quote the following stanza from the Dhammapada to say how fortunate I am to have born been born, in the same country where such a noble person was born and lived. Quoting this from Dhammapada, Dullabho purisa jajño naso sabbatta jayati yattaso jayati dhiro tankulang sukhamedati. Buddha Varga in Dhammapada, stanza 193. A person of great wisdom is seldom found. Such a person appears not everywhere. The family and the nation into which such a person is born is very fortunate. May Venerable Anagarika Dharmapala, by virtue of his merits and the merits we all have accrued, obtain the supreme goal of the Dhamma, the cessation of all suffering, Nibbana. Thank you very much indeed. I'll try my best to answer or anything to clear up.
So, well, thank you very much for a most interesting talk.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the floor?
I have to mention that when I was a small, that's why I must dedicate this talk to my mother. My father passed away when I was at the age of 2. My mother I was born in a village very close to Mathura, this place, used to say, there is this extraordinary man, son, you must obviously pass away long years ago. When you study, please read about him and follow his advice. We wouldn't see anyone like it in our country or anywhere in the world. So I think I should dedicate what I said to my dearest mother. He's the one who mentioned Anagarika's name to me when I was at the age of 5, I remember. He's a great man.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
You know what's happening in Sri Lanka now in relation to religion?
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Any relation
to religion, because there's been this war with Tamil.
I think it is nothing to do with the religion, as Professor Gomrich has said. This is not a religious war, anything to do with the religion. This is just a political issue or the civil unrest. This question of Buddhism or Christianity never came up, although some, very unkindly, some American authors, what we call the sociologists, our own people, have tried to link this struggle or the whatever the LTG, the unrest or war, to Buddhism. To my knowledge, I don't think there was any link or any connection at all. In even so, where I come from, where we still have so many Tamil people, the same family.
It's like
We never.
in Burma now, you see what's the
Yeah, that's probably a different way, but I'm not very confident in Burmese situation. But in Sri Lanka, to my knowledge, there was no religious war as such what we conceive here or had in Europe. And Buddhism, obviously there is no struggle. No one is going to convert you, either you to accept or follow it. Like Ehipassika, as Buddha said, there is no threat or insistence. It's open. Yeah. So if this unfortunate war we had, in my opinion, was nothing to do with religion or religions we have in Sri Lanka. That was all the very unfortunate what we had.
Yes?
I was wondering these days how familiar are Sri Lankan people with the life of Dhamapala and whether he still has much influence?
I think it has, because unfortunately some years ago when these textbooks were written or the prepared by the then government, Dharmapala his character was deleted. But now recently the history lessons or the history textbooks have been rewritten, including the cultural history, Buddhism, and Dharmapala has a significant place in these syllabuses, in textbooks. So now the children, even at the age of 8 or 10, they now know who Dharmapala and who he was.
They know him as a national figure or as a
Religious, both national and religious figure, yeah, revivalist, yeah. And obviously there are, as I remember, there are 3 statues. I'm not sure whether they are going to erect more statues, but there are 3. One at Mathura, in Colombo and Kandy. Yes. It's good thing when I visit Sri Lanka next time and go to a village school and ask children, do you know?
Yes.
I haven't had a chance to speak to them. But I'm talking about, as Buddha said, attanam upamam kattva, compare yourself first. I actually talked to my brother's children when I went after giving that talk at the Buddhist temple. Do you know Dharmapala? He said, yes, we know him. We know what he did. So that's why I said, attanam upamam kattva, don't go any further, just compare yourself. That's why I asked my brother's children. If they know that, I'm sure everybody else should know it. Yes. It's a good question, yeah. We have to ask adults also this time. I will ask the same question.
One thing, sir. Because long reading is, rather than if we can get a small piece of paper, whatever is there written, then we can study ourselves.
This is, I'm going to revise because I prepared this talk. I thought I must give it informally, but there are a lot to quote. And yeah, I can just summarize and send it.
We're going to publish it.
Hand out.
We will publish it in the middle way. In
What
the
about
journal.
the debate between...
The debate.
Yes.
Yeah, I have studied. It's a very interesting debate, and I started writing an article on that debate, and it has to be quite lengthy because the questions asked and the replies given.
Yeah.
When I have done it, I can send it. It's a very interesting debate.
Oh, I bet.
Very interesting debate. And this Mohotyawate Gunananda, whose statue is at Panadura, he in fact studied Christianity first. He was a graduate. He did his BA and then became a monk. This is what I heard. Then he studied Buddhism. That's why he was so good in answering.
Yeah.
And also in that debate, strangely, the British, they didn't employ European scholars. Only the local Christians put to the stage. Not a single British or European scholar who was there to answer. The 3 of them were local Christians who had not studied Buddhism to answer. That's why the Mohotyawate Gunananda had the good chance to, ridicule. Yeah.
Fly on the wall.
Yeah, that's right. The best ever debate. Yeah.
I'd love to read it. At least a abbreviated version.
And regarding this Anagarika Dharmapa, not only his Dhammadutta mission, his family is still running this furniture business. They are so honest. You wouldn't see any cheating in their goods, I must say, because I checked it myself actually. I bought a table, comparing prices elsewhere in Colombo. This is genuinely the timber you mentioned. Not a single inch of other timber inserted in. They are so honest. I'm sure the tradition is still going on in their secular life as well. Very honest people, the descendants.
Yes.
That's a great. Yeah. So he changed strangely Dharmapala to start with. As you can see, when he became a monk, he chose his name as Dhammapala, the Pali name. But to start with, he took the Sanskrit word Dharmapala. But when he became a monk, he changed it to the right Pali word Dhammapala.
I didn't understand why he could become a monk early on.
So I quoted that because of
Is it bad leg?
yes, I think when you are disabled, when you are not quite fit, because Dhammadutta Vyapara you have to go. I'm not sure whether there is a prohibition in the Vinaya that you cannot be a monk, but if you are blind, as far as I understand, you cannot.
I think you have to hold your senses.
And also people can ridicule him. That's a papa.
I see.
If say, oh, look at that, like that. So even a disabled or without a leg can't be a monk so far. I think Buddha took all these things into consideration because Buddha didn't want any of his disciples to be ridiculed by Hindus, saying, oh look, he has no, how can he preach like that? I think it is still the Vinaya. So I heard that when people saw Dharmapala, they noticed that the limping or that slight disability of his right foot. He has, that I quoted from his own, that's why he didn't want to be a monk.
Do you know if he had any contact with Kumaraswamy?
I'm not sure. It's a good area. The other great Oriental.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure he had. Yeah.
But it's amazing what one man can do who's very motivated, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
He had such a profound influence.
Oh yes, yes. And the Kumar, we had great people in the early, over the late 19th century, like Sir Ponnambalam Arunachalam, Kumaraswamy, great people. Yeah, great. Dharmapala. Just they never think of any communal tension or any differences between Sinhala or Tamil or other. They just work for the country's welfare. Yeah. They Arunachalam educated at Cambridge, first class, went back as a lawyer. But he didn't want to be in the top elite. Just came down to earth and worked for the people. Yeah. So Kumaraswamy is like that.
Yes.
So Anagarika Dharmapala from the other end. But it's very unfortunate that some of the American sociologists, they just take Dharmapala and earn millions of money by publishing their work. But they are very unkind to them. They can't understand when he says he's a Brahmachari. Because people are different. There can be, for instance, myself, I don't drink, I don't eat meat, I'm happy. Sometimes people say, you are not usual. Why don't you even have a glass of beer? It is not my weakness, that is how I am. There are people. So Dharmapala was far ahead. So maybe he didn't have any desire, but Americans have criticized him for being Brahmachari. And they say he couldn't believe and all those things. Some Harvard scholars, in fact, I wrote to them saying, if you don't understand, then don't write these things in your publications. And also, someone has said that he couldn't, that he was not sure Anagarika Dharmapala could speak Sinhalese. Their parents were speaking Sinhalese at home. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. Yeah, written Sinhala is different because we learn it as a second language. There is such a big gap between spoken and written Sinhala. And there are people who cannot write well. That is a normality. But anyone can speak if it is his or her mother tongue. Very, very unkind, some scholars have been to. Because they used Anagarika Dharmapala and write articles and books and earn millions of dollars. But it has to be some kindness to the genuine work he has done.
Is there any history of Mary?
Yeah, I think recently one scholar from Harvard, he contacted me and said he's writing a book on Dharmapala. Mm-hmm. He has actually gone to meet Mary Foster's family.
Yes.
And he had met his brother. He's the one who took injunction against Mary Foster to stop
spending money.
Giving money to Dharmapala's trust, saying she was insane because she didn't want to stop. They were very rich, equal shares, but I think Mary Foster had a bigger share. So they were, I think, giving fresh water to you can imagine their income. So he was successful in obtaining an injunction. So from that year, I can't remember, this Harvard scholar told me, from that year everything was stopped. Otherwise money was coming even after Anagarika's death to his Anagarika Dharmapala trust. It was stopped. Yeah, and he was in Hawaii in searching of all his traces and the family work. I'm sure he has finished his book.
But it hasn't been published yet.
No, not yet. Not. I think probably he had just finished his work.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I asked him to find where that boat is, which Anagarika Dharmapala took to Hawaii.
It's interesting because 1924, when they bought the house in Gloucester Road, was the same year that the Buddhist Society was started. Same year.
Oh, right.
Did it move here? When did it move here?
Not in the Buddhist Society wasn't here. It was.
No. When did it move here?
It moved here in the 50s. So I'm not sure actually. No, I think it was the 40s. Not sure.
That's why the Anagarika, the word Anagarika, the homeless one, can give wrong connotations or meanings, because when I was talking about this at the university, one student asked, was he very poor and homeless one? I said, no, he wasn't poor. But obviously he left all that to the, and he became homeless, Anagarika. Not that he was extremely poor.
But he travelled.
He travelled a lot, yeah. Yeah, he would have been a very rich person if he had gone the other way, multi-millionaire, inheriting all that wealth. But
yes, the 1896, the World Congress of Faiths was also where D.T. Suzuki spoke for the first time.
oh, right.
At the same meeting. So it's quite interesting. So to America they had Dharmapala with the Theravada and Suzuki and his teacher with the Mahayana.
Yeah, he is considered as a bodhisattva in today's society in Sri Lanka. Bodhisattva.
So do we have any more questions?
And also before that's on meditation, because he was so interested in introducing it to England.
Yes.
The first monk he invited to be here, Paravahara Vajrajnana, was the greatest of this discipline. That I think that's the best book ever written on Buddhist meditation by Paravahara Vajrajnana. He did his PhD at Cambridge, and this was his thesis. Buddhist meditation and practice by Paravahara Vajrajnana. He was the first resident monk, the London Buddhist Vihara. So Anagarika especially invited this monk to be here to give proper instructions and authentic way of Buddhist meditation. I think the Venerable or the great scholar was in London for 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
Because initially people didn't think that Buddhism was something you practiced. They used to, strangely enough, just think something you thought about. You know, you sat in your library and you read your book about Buddhism, and that was it.
Yes, that's
you
right.
Scholastic
sort of exercise,
Scholastic.
What about the link with the Theosophical Society? We met him with Tatarsky. He said that he
that's
was introduced here by the
Theosophists, Theosophists, Olcott. Olcott, and that's how Anagarika Dharmapala got involved. But he later departed because the Colonel Olcott was into the Hindu mythology and those.
Right.
So, with the advice from this great monk Hikkaduwe Sumangala, Anagarika Dharmapala decided to leave them, because Hikkaduwe Sumangala, even a book has been written on this great monk Hikkaduwe Sumangala by an American professor called Professor Anne Blackburn, Locations of Buddhism. But it is about this monk's great story and Anagarika Dharmapala, recently published. Sumangala, that great monk, was behind Anagarika Dharmapala to give all these advice and on meditation or Buddhism as a science, or all these topics he discussed and delivered. He was behind. One of the greatest monks ever lived in Sri Lanka, Hikkaduwe Sumangala.